we've got a tight agenda, so we'll kick off. Welcome to Measure Up 2020. Feels slightly different than normally standing at Barangaroo in the PwC building with many of you face to face. So we've had to, as most people have, reimagine our conference this year. So Measure Up will be held over 3 mornings. From 9 to 11:30. The delightful part of that is we get so many more people from interstate, from New Zealand, and some through Asia joining us. So welcome, and look, hopefully next year we'll be back in person and having networking and drinks and those wonderful caramel tarts that PwC have in their foyer. All right, so as I said, 3 mornings this year. We're going to have about 25 different presenters over the 3 days. From a wide range of perspectives from both local and overseas people. The one thing that we do try, and I guess with all IAB activities, but Measure Up in particular, is keep it real. And that sounds probably like not keeping it real by even saying that, but really trying to challenge our presenters to bring data to the table, bring new ideas, and really be less salesy and more, how can we move our industry forward with some great new research. And we've got a lot of that lined up for you today. The recording and most of the presentations will be available post-conference. We'll try and get most of those sessions up next week sometime. But you guys who are on the call get sort of the first glimpse of everything, first mover advantage. So glad you can join us, and hopefully you'll, I guess, dip in and out over the 3 days. So if you do want to stay on for the 2.5 hours or 3 days, we would love to have you. The 3 days are roughly themed. I'll come back to that. We're going to introduce Matt in a minute. Roughly themed. So this morning's really focusing on the science of media measurement and marketing outcomes. Tomorrow we've got a little bit more detail on data and retail, and really getting into how particularly first-party data can be used to drive the industry forward. And then on the Thursday, we go a bit broader, looking at building brands and very much from a marketer's perspective on how they should be assessing their brand development. So 3 mornings there. The full detail of the agendas up on the IAB website, but hopefully can join us for some of that. I'd like to really thank the sponsors of this event who have stuck with us for a virtual event and been really generous with their time and money to help make sure that this event could go forward, and the team could really put in a lot of time and energy to make this work for the industry, bring a whole lot of content forward. So thanks to Google, IS, Ipsos, and Facebook for their support. We really do appreciate it. Investing in the industry and the IAB is much appreciated, and it does support all of us. Another thank you. So our broad group of members that have stuck with us and hopefully felt supported over the last 6 months and before that. I guess a reminder that we have such a broad community and a broadening community for the IAB. You know, whether it be media owner side, platforms, increasingly on the agency and the marketer side as well. So thank you for all of that, and hopefully you felt the IAB team love over the last 6 months as we've tried to do more and more with our members, whether that be through webinars or Q&As, briefings, etc. So always feel like you can reach out to the team at the IAB to see what's going on, and let us, more importantly, know what's going on with your businesses and your initiatives. Throughout the 3 days, we will have time for Q&A for most sessions, not all. It is pretty tight, but please pop your questions in the Q&A box. In lieu of networking, feel free to use the chat to either the presenters or your fellow participants. Please sort of get involved and make that come to life. We will be having on the 3 days our friends at Ipsos, who are experts in research and polling. We'll be having a poll, a couple of questions each day to get a read of the market sentiment and I guess knowledge in the industry as well of what's going on. So looking forward to seeing the results results of those each day. But to officially kick off Measure Up, I'd like to welcome Matt Rowley, who's our wonderful chair, as well as being CEO of the pedestrian group and part of the 9 family, so lots of roles. And Matt's going to give a few thoughts on Measure Up for 2020.
Thanks, Gay, and morning, everybody. Yeah, I just thought I'd give a bit of a personal thought, because when Gay and I were talking about the key themes in this year's Measure Up, which is just kind of run through there, one of them took me back in time, way back to 2018. You know, as we all know, 2020, it's felt like about 5 years. But back in 2018, I was Fairfax Media's representative to a joint venture between ourselves, 9, and News Corp. So originally that joint venture had been a premium inventory exchange called Apex, but as the world changed, we evolved it into the exploration of an identity data sharing vehicle, and it was under the title Project Townsend. Now, back then, we could collectively see the emergence of signed-in data through subscriptions and BVOD, but it was against a background of like the cookie's demise, and it was yielding an opportunity that we couldn't ignore if you could find the right technology, which was really nascent at the time. Now, while Townsend didn't result in a joint venture solution, the knowledge gained from it evolved our thinking strongly. And if you skip forward a few years, I mean, how things have changed. Most sizable publishers have or are working on a solution in this space. For example, at 9, we just launched Audience Match, our people-based partnership with Adobe. So such solutions are giving publishers, marketers, and agencies the power to move from anonymized clicks to attributable outcomes under secured and managed privacy. However, it's one thing to have the raw capability, it's another thing to use it effectively, and then to be able to prove that. And that's where the IAB comes in my opinion. Sharing standards, best practice, and education through awesome events like Measure Up. We're not just talking about what's going on now, but we're also going to help us on the journey to find out where we could be. And you didn't even need to fund an unlikely joint venture to generate that knowledge. How good is that? So it's why I'm so excited over our agenda the next few days, is as we tick off those great things that the IAB brings to the industry. And it's also why I'm going to get out of the way and hand back to Gay to get it all running.
Thanks, Matt. I love not funding a joint venture, having been involved with many of them myself. All right, let me go back to sharing the screen. One thing that we did introduce for this year, which we were going to introduce regardless of the pandemic, but was a new awards program for linked to Measure Up, and really supporting the development of robust and useful and important research in market that's coming from media owners, platforms, and technology companies. So this was a delightful project to work on. Being a researcher by nature, I got to have a sticky beak of what's been launched in market in the last sort of 18 months. And we worked very closely with the MFA on this. So the MFA Interactive Committee, hopefully you recognise some of their wonderful faces there, were the independent judges in these awards, and went through, we were pleased to have a field of 19 different entries that were broken into 2 categories, and some really interesting research that came out of it. And we're hoping to continue this initiative and really drive you know, an improvement, even though we saw a great field of research, but just overall lifting the standard of research that we see in markets. So without further ado, I would like to announce the winners. You got a sneak preview there. So there were 2 categories that were, all the entries were broken into. One was ad effectiveness, and one was more on the consumer side of things. So cultural, societal, and audience research. So the first winner for the inaugural Research Awards for Measure Up was Bauer, or our media, the artist formerly known as Bauer, that I actually still think of as ACP. But they did some fantastic research on a demographic close to my heart, women age 50 plus. And some really interesting new ways of looking at this, looking at the 50 plus women's market. This one delights me in particular because there's been a long heritage of ACP/BAL/R media in looking at particularly the women's market and making sure that it's, you know, really interrogated on those societal trends, consumer trends, and they're continuing to invest and, you know, do that deep work. And it's not specific to any of their publications. It's really understanding that mindset of women and sharing that with agencies and clients so they can make sure that, you know, the content and the ads are really hitting the mark with that audience. So huge congratulations to R Media for their Defiant research. The second winner on the ad effectiveness side, so an area that's been getting a lot of attention, which is attention. So congratulations to Playground XYZ for their research project Attention Time, which really looked at mobile attention, but has a lot of implications across the board. And the judges really like this research for a number of reasons, but particularly because it did show true innovation in research. So they tried different things and they didn't necessarily know the answers going in. So it was true exploration and trying to find new answers for the market. So it's fabulous to see, I guess, a local born company investing in this type of research, and it's now being used around the world. And also one thing that Playground XYZ did was we've seen a lot of academic research on attention, but find solutions that could be embedded into sort of real-time media buying. Both those award winners will have a slot at Measure Up to present their research. So we will hear from Playground XYZ tomorrow. Rob Hall, from the CEO of Playground, will present their attention research. And then on Thursday, we will hear from Jane Waterhouse from R Media, looking at their Defiant research. So there's also a press release and some of the two white papers, which we'll share the link in the chat box if you want to go and have a squiz and interrogate the area. So congratulations to both those guys, and thanks again to the MFA team for really taking the awards seriously. Really, I mean, it was a delight to watch them deliberate on what research was useful for agencies and clients. So they're the award winners. So I will get into the main part of the conference now. So this is a rundown for today's agenda. So we'll shortly hear from Richard Halton from ISBA, who I spoke to in the UK last week. Then we go into a panel with some really smart thinkers around measurement frameworks and how we can support the industry there. As I said, we'll hear from Ipsos and have their poll questions, so get ready to be interactive there. We're going to chat to Matt O'Grady from Nielsen, who looks after global media and is based in the UK, on some of the developments that they're making. And then the last session for the day will be looking again at attention. So it's interesting to compare all these different pieces of research and looking at Google, very much looking at the video, both from an ad and a content point of view, and some new research that they've done in that area. So hopefully you can stick with us for most of that today. First session for the day, I had the delight of chatting to Richard Halton last week. As I mentioned, he is driving a project called Project Origin, which ISBA have launched off the back of a lot of work that the WFA, so the Worldwide Federation of Advertisers, have been doing around cross-media measurement. I think most people on the conference call would know that we've talked about cross-media measurement solutions for many, many years now, and they can mean many things to many different people. The encouraging thing that the work with the WFA has done is really, I guess, make the advertisers answer, what is it you want? And hopefully some of you have seen the framework that they came out with, their global principles for cross-media measurement, which really tried to pinpoint the main criteria that's needed in the industry. And even, the question of, answering the question, what do they want, which most advertisers will say sort of an unduplicated reach and frequency across all media, which as we know is not an easy thing to do, but there's nuance in that, whether it's content or ads, if you have comparable metrics, if it's independent data or a collaboration of first party data. So the guys in the UK have really taken the bull by the horns and taken this framework and tried to work with some of the solutions that the WFA have been working on and look what it can mean for the UK market. So I'm going to play a short video with Richard and then we're going to go into a panel where we'll pull out from a solution based and look at sort of that broader piece for marketers. So I will launch this video. Please add questions if you need.
Right.
Morning, Richard. Welcome to the IAB Measure Up conference.
Morning.
Oops.
And good to be here.
We're really excited about this session. We've been hearing about this project through whispers and rumours for a couple of years now. I've been working in media measurement for 25 years, and I think we've been talking about cross-media measurement ever since I started in the industry, working at portals that were connected to TV stations and magazines, trying to get a solution. So it's exciting to see, I guess, something hopefully come to life. Could you give us a little bit of background, I guess, on what do you think the original vision of the WFA mission was, where you think we're at now, and why ISBAR's got involved?
Thanks, Kay. So, like you, I started my career in television just over 20 years ago, and actually working in broadcast strategy and research. And actually the thing I couldn't believe when I joined from retail was how much data the TV industry had. I mean, it was extraordinary. I also couldn't believe how little of it was ever surfaced into boardrooms to inform decisions. And actually, I like to think one of the things I spent a lot of my time at the BBC doing was trying to bring audience data into decision-making processes, and particularly about where money was spent and how it was allocated. In the case of the BBC, in relation to commissioning rather than media spend. But as we both have sort of noticed, this has been a problem for a long, long time. And I think it's important that the WFA have taken such a fundamental look at the issue. And I think starting with an advertiser association who's coming at this very much from a neutral perspective in terms of just wanting to get the most value for media spend in a way that's agnostic as consumer behavior changes and technology changes has been really, really important to the approach. And I think that's been recognized by the industry. And I think the great thing about the WFA approach is it's a broad review involving marketers, agencies, broadcasters, platforms, and it's a global initiative. It reflects the fact that increasingly media is spent to strategies that sit across multiple markets and on platforms and indeed TV networks that have global ownership and reach. So I think that the combination of a major collaboration and a global perspective is really fundamental to what's being developed.
And ISBAR's got involved in what way? What do you plan to do now with this framework that's been set up?
Yes, I think ISBA have some bragging rights in the sense that they were kind of pushing away at this problem a couple of years ago, and were very involved then with the WFA in terms of scaling the thinking. And where we are now is that Origin, which is the project I run for ISBA, is intended as one of two global blueprints for the WFA approach. So Origin in the UK, and then work that the ANA are doing in the US. And the hope, I guess, is that we can do some work in the UK that, as far as possible, scales into other markets. So as we think about this, and not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it, we're trying to think of ways in which we can make this work accessible to other markets, so that we can help kickstart a broader global set of movements.
We've seen, I guess, frameworks or very high level, dare I say, narratives come out on cross-media measurement before. And they've always seemed to fall over when you actually go, well, how do I build for that? I guess before we talk about even building for it, even going back to buy and sell side having quite different language. So cross-media measurement to a publisher is their own environments, and to an advertiser, it's obviously their own activity. Do you feel in terms of the work that's been done to date with the WFA working group, everyone's very clear on what metrics and what you're trying to build actually is?
I think there was a period probably about a year ago where that felt like a sort of uncomfortable negotiation, because advertisers had a sort of long list of things they wanted. Platforms and broadcasters had a set of conventions about how they did things, and so it was a standoff. You know, this is what, as the sell side, we'd be prepared to offer, and then this is what, as the buy side, we might be prepared to accept. And I think one of the best things about the WFA approach is that there was a sort of moment 12 months ago where that whole conversation was swept aside, and the provocation was put back to marketers to say, what do you need? Fundamentally, what do you need? Whether it's feasible, legal, in terms of privacy law and so on and so forth, or practically delivered, doesn't matter. And the advertiser North Star grew out of that, which is in the WFA framework. The advertiser North Star grew out of that very clear-headed, far-sighted goal for what was meant by media measurement. And it's a very ambitious list of requirements. And I think what that's enabled then is the industry, the sell-side industry, to say, okay, we can work towards that, but there have to be some guardrails around, for example, privacy and privacy law. The industry as a whole wants to see trust and transparency. And then beyond that, there has to be a sense of a roadmap. So yes, of course, we all want everything, but day one, what are our priorities? And that's again where, with this framework and with the work we're trying to do with Origin, we're trying to be very focused on immediately what are the things that we believe that we can deliver that give the most value to marketers.
And what are those?
Very simple words. A focus on reach and frequency in the first instance, with Richard, the ambition then beyond that comes effectiveness. And
is that for TV, video, digital media? What's the scope? Right.
So reaching from a metrics perspective, reach and frequency, and then from a media perspective, TV and display. And then, you can imagine, you then think about other media, out of home, audio, et cetera, as you go forward. And I think, we'll get into the how and the technology, I'm sure, in a second. But in terms of the architecture that we want to develop, technical architecture, my challenge has always been, okay, we can focus on day one requirements, but we need a solution and we need an architecture that will scale across multiple media and will scale to multiple metrics. And so trying to think about an overall technical framework that's future-proof, while at the same time being super clear about what we want to deliver day one and being kind of pragmatic about that. I think that's the trick to the work that we're doing right now.
Okay, so that's identifying what's needed. In terms of data inputs, what are you imagining needs to be either come from existing currencies, existing first-party data sets? What are the inputs going to look like?
Yeah, and I mean, I come at this from a sort of business strategy background and having run a technology business for the last 8 or so years. So I'm really comfortable with the sort of business challenge, and I'm reasonably comfortable with the kind of tech architecture. I think what's been eye-opening for me is how, getting my head further under the hood of the various different the value propositions, if you like, of each of the different platforms. And I think, that the trick to this is respecting the differential value of each different media. And the television industry makes a very strong case as to why television's special and different. I don't think the television industry itself quite appreciates how passionately each of the digital platforms feel that way about their own platforms in respect to the other digital platforms, never mind in respect to television. So I think, therefore, one of the things we have to be sensitive to is, of course, every media has its own particular differentiated value, and that quite often is reflected in different metrics or the relatively different importance of different metrics. And so I think one thing that's key to all of this is that marketers can look at a data set that gives them a picture across media, but that also allows them to build a plan, a campaign that makes the most of each different media and allows those different media to be bought and used in the right ways to deliver the different objectives of a campaign. So what does that mean? I think that means that we need a measurement system that does give us some consistency across platforms and allows for a sort of common view, if you like, a definition in respect of core metrics, but which also reflects the fact that, of course, anyone buying media has a very sophisticated set of tools and techniques already, and they need to be able to see how the differential value of different media is brought to bear, whether that's, a duration weighted approach to TV, more of a kind of instant reach building approach into some of the digital platforms, and those different conventions around different media and how they're measured have to be respected in the system that's built.
And are you talking about reach and frequency metrics, both from a content as well as an ad point of view? So a campaign point of view as well as an environment point of view?
Yeah, so the North Star is clear that this has to be editorial as content as well as campaign. And I think, going back to what I was saying earlier about the value of different media, Twitter, Snap, the context of those platforms in terms of not just the audiences they deliver, but the nature of the engagement of those audiences is critical to their value and their position in the media landscape. So respecting context is important. Now, that said, capturing content measurement and defining that and the nature of some of those platforms is really tough. So I think, again, day one, we will focus on campaign delivery, but the architecture is being developed to capture content as well.
I guess some of the sort of the more currency products have that sort of overarching, or single source panels have a bit more of that environmental top line story for planners anyway.
Yeah, and just in the same way, I guess a cross media solution that's built as this is on a fusion method with a panel, you can capture that contextual data more easily, more quickly for some media than you can for others. So, in Australia, if a day one requirement was to capture content context for television, that's perfectly feasible. So I think it's going to be up to each market to make decisions about the relative priority of what's measured as you look at your plan for the work.
So that's the input side of things. And you're talking very much up front about privacy compliant way of managing and bringing this to life. So from a solution point of view, what are you trying to build something? Are you trying to put parameters around what's built, or what are you trying to build, Richard?
So I think in every market, the answer to that question is going to be a little bit different, depending on what's there already and who runs it, and what scope there is to evolve existing propositions. And I think it's easy to see any new proposal as being, by its nature, a greenfield, right? You have to raise the ground and start again. I don't think that's necessary. And what's being proposed at the WFA sort of technical proposal level, architectural level, is a fusion of taking existing first-party data and a single source panel, using that to build a virtual model of the population, and then enabling publishers to run their live data sets against that virtual population to pick up reach and frequency across multiple platforms and hence deduplicate. And I think it's going to vary by market. The intention is absolutely that it's a system that should enable current and ongoing first party data to be incorporated. I think when we think about kind of a single source panel to power that, or to act as a single source of truth, my expectation would be that would be an existing panel in most markets. So I think, you know, the idea here is to come up with an approach that fuses existing data sources, not kind of creating, as I say, a sort of, it's not a question of kind of raising the ground and building something new. We're too far into this for that to be the right approach.
It's going to be some good work for us as smart statisticians and data fusion people.
Yeah,
that's great.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the development of this, so there's been this large working group coming out of the WFA. There's been a lot of heavy lifting already done trying to work out if data can, I guess, be fused in this sort of privacy compliant way. The rumours and whispers that have hit the Australian market is, you know, that the people who, I guess, who have got the resources to help support build this have been really heavily involved. Do you feel like this is being built out as a solution that's inclusive enough for all different media players of different sizes?
So I think there was definitely a kind of moment in the WFA process where, having had advertisers, marketers involved very closely in defining the North Star, there was a sort of pause where and now what do we do question was kind of hanging in the ether. And, you know, the key challenge actually that the WFA faced in an implementation was, if we were talking about a solution that leveraged first-party data, be that, you know, data from the digital platforms or BVOD data from broadcasters, the first question that arises is around privacy. And how is that, and not even just individual privacy, but also ensuring that multiple data sets from multiple platforms can be combined. Yeah, and you get into kind of antitrust issues as well as privacy issues, right? So, which is very serious stuff for a director of any company will know. So, so it was inevitable, I guess, that the problem that was put at the front of the queue was solving for privacy. And the people best placed to solve for privacy were the companies with the most first-party data. So the initial thinking done for the WFA about a fusion model was done by some of the digital platforms. And I think when that was then shared and presented back to the industry, one of the questions that was asked was, well, hang on, this doesn't feel like it was kind of a TV process that came out of the TV industry. It feels like it came out of the digital platform industry. And actually at ISBA, we kind of said, well, look, that was always true. That wasn't a kind of, that wasn't surprise. That was where the thinking came from, correct. So how do we now continue a process that adds the TV dimension to the story, which was, you know, left as a sort of incomplete part of the solution? So what we've been doing in the UK over the summer is now looking at how do you make sure that the solution is properly reflective of all media. We've been looking at how you respect the conventions of TV measurement and those metrics. We've been looking at the measurement solutions that are necessary to capture TV viewing and how that fusion model would work, and how TV or TV particularly works within a virtual ID fusion model. One of the markets that's done more work on that than us is Australia, as it happens. But, you know, we've been looking at that from a bit more from fresh eyes. And so really for us, the period since the WFA peer review process, which was in June, so where are we now, October, has been all about making sure that multiple media, and particularly the TV piece, is in there. And we've brought the experts who have for years done the kind of data science behind the TV measurement and panels in the UK. We've brought them into the program, and they've been working with us to make sure we have that kind of balanced perspective. And that's sort of where we feel we're getting to in terms of the solution that we want to recommend.
And you've had the print guys involved from an ozone point of view as well, I understand?
Yeah, so all of the major UK news brands have been represented by Ozone and Newsworks. So we've had them round the table, and I think they're vital, both in terms of the media that they represent, but also trying to think about a solution and governance for a solution that works for smaller publishers as well as just the big major broadcasters and global media players.
You've got a big project there, Richard. If you were to dream, so what's the timing on, I guess, next steps? These projects can go on a long time. When do you think there would be in the UK at least, a product in market?
Yeah, so we've been trying to run this based on kind of gates. So we've been doing 6-month sprints essentially. And so we're in the second of those. And every time we have a sprint or a phase of work, we set really clear kind of exit goals. So phase 1, the exit goal was, do we have broad consensus on standards, metrics, governance, the partnership group that we want to move forward with? That was in May. This time the goal is, do we believe that we have a technical solution that could work? And we've done huge amounts of more detailed investigation on standards and metrics and the technical approach. That work completes before the end of the year. And the next phase, 6 to 9 months, will be to try and prove that this does work, and we want to build a pilot and a prototype. So the aim would be to try and do that for next summer. I'm not going to commit to any timescales beyond that, although practically speaking, once there's a pilot and a proof of concept, the next stage is then to kind of onboard people into that and start to scale it. And I think that's when the real kind of hard yards begin. So, expect that to be middle end of next year when we start that work.
Oh,
so yeah, and I think it's important to take time and bring people on the journey as part of what we're doing.
We're watching closely. We're obviously a smaller market with pretty high sort of tagging penetration and collaboration. So we'll definitely be watching. However many more gates you need to go through. Imagine, you're a exhausted but happy project director, and this thing is now live and it's being used by major advertisers as well as media owners. What do you think people will do differently? So obviously there'll be more clarity. Do you think it'll change the market in any way?
Yeah, well, I think the market is changing, right? So I think we need to be a bit careful. The market is changing so fast and so fundamentally. It's also being subjected to external shocks, the most obvious one being around COVID-19. And I think actually I look at it a bit differently in the sense that without a proper cross-media measurement system, we're flying blind. We don't know enough, or as much as we should, about how changing technology is driving changes in media consumption. We're doing a much better job of kind of pretending we know what's going on, and there's a lot of talk. So for me, this is more kind of, this is the cart, not the horse, right? And we need to know what's going on out there. And be able to observe patterns of behavior as they change, in order to kind of insulate media spend against changing audience behavior. So I think, ultimately the goal here is it's around efficiency of spend, and it's also about a better consumer experience. Be that about frequency or whatever, or just a more effective kind of relationship between consumers and brands. So it's economic efficiency, it's a better consumer experience. And then the other thing I think we kind of miss out sometimes is, this is all media investment that drives, or this is all media spend that drives or underpins investment in content. And, certainly in the UK, and I come from a public service background at the BBC, if this generates more money at the end of the day onto screens and into content, that's really important, really powerful. And I think that's something we mustn't lose sight of either as we think about the work. So yeah, it sort of feels like it's a worthwhile, but I would say now kind of imperative cause that we need the whole industry to get behind.
That's a beautiful note to finish on. Thank you so much for your time today. We're looking forward to hearing more about it. Maybe this time next year we'll have an update. You'll have some pilot data for us.
Well, hopefully not. Maybe, definitely. I'd love to.
Beautiful. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hopefully you enjoyed that. Now we're going to be joined by a fabulous panel talking about cross-media measurement, but more on a measurement framework point of view and how marketers can really, in amongst a changing market, keep some clarity on their own goals and how they're looking at activity. So welcome to Angelina, Imran and Paul. I'll stop sharing and let's get chatting.
Hello there.
Hey.
Hello from New York.
Yeah, thanks for staying up, Angelina.
Not a problem.
All right, let's crack into it. So I guess the framing of this is quite obvious for most people on the call. We've got a challenged economy globally. We've got constant changes in media consumption, whether that be shifting within digital, extra digital sort of digitization of other channels. We've got huge changes for the industry in terms of browser tech, privacy, identifiers. So everything's up for grabs, right? I'm going to get you all just to give a top level, I guess, framing and a bit of advice for marketers. So while all this is changing, how on earth can marketers create, I guess, frameworks or systems that allow these different types of activities as they change, not to completely overwhelm them and allow them to keep assessing clearly what's going on in their own activity? Paul, let's kick off with you.
Sure. Okay. Well, my experience and expertise is more, looking at the impact on sales and looking at the impact on brand. I'll focus on sales firstly, and apologies, this is probably going to be pretty verbose, but I know, with a lot of the changes, people are now saying, can you measure the impact on sales? The answer is yeah, you still can entirely. It's just that you need to move from a deterministic model to a probabilistic approach. So what I mean there is, rather than having the long customer journey, being able to see every activity that somebody's done on their online journey, and then, let's be honest, assigning all of the value to the last thing that they do in most cases. It's instead now looking at the probability of things. So rather than looking at the individual, looking at segments, looking at cohorts, looking at groups of customers and saying, what's the probability of an activity impacting them and getting them to change? It's more accurate. It can still be a live dynamic thing based into a system. It can still be live and learning. It can still be evolving and growing. But it means that you can do it without needing it at that identity level because it's probabilities. It can bring in absolutely anything. So there's a lot of people doing it. The other advantage is cross-platform, true cross-platform measurement isn't as important for measurement. Now, it's still very important for, knowing things like, say, your incremental reach and that sort of activity, but to know what's happened, it's less important because, even when we were looking for Nirvana, we were really matching TV and digital, right? We were ignoring out-of-home, press, radio, all of those other things. And I don't have many clients that only use TV and digital. So it was having to be stitched together anyway. Now all we're saying is you have to stitch together other data as well. It's not a new process. To be honest, it's been around since the 50s. It's just a case of doing it with a bigger data set and bringing people back to it. So it might mean a little bit of investment. It might mean a little bit of upskilling for people, but it's definitely possible. So, that's my first move from deterministic to probabilistic. The second is having a solution that relies on identity is going to be a lot harder going forwards. You can definitely still activate at a identity level. If you've got an identity partner, you want to create audiences, you definitely still can using that segment data. If you've got authenticated traffic data from LiveRank or something like that, you can use it. But relying on that as your measurement framework is going to be tricky because there's a lot of partners who still won't play in that space. First party data are really important, but if you're relying on data on people that you have an interaction with, you're not growing your penetration. And I think as marketers, we need to focus on growth. So whilst it can be part of it, I don't think that you want a solution that's reliant on it to be able to be future proof. So that's my second kind of tip is segment or groups of customers rather than at an identity level. I think everything can kind of help, but just don't be reliant on it.
Fantastic. I was expecting you to go on, Paul. I used to.
My reputation precedes me.
Angelina, what are your thoughts on how marketers can handle all of this?
You called on me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, so there's two things actually, and that's really being involved. We have several companies, especially trade organizations, that are really trying to answer a lot of these questions and solve some of the fragmentation that we have in the marketplace. So if you think about, I'm just going to promote the IAB Tech Lab. A lot of the things that we work on is based off of member input and participation. And in order for us to develop some of the measurement requirements or measurement needs of a buyer and a marketer, we need tech specs in order to figure out how to deliver those types of metrics and measuring dimensions. So I really encourage companies to be involved with your local trade organization, be it IAB or with a tech lab or with WFA or any of those organizations, and really give your recommendations on what you'd like to see, the methodologies behind them, and where that information should be sourced. The second thing I think is really important is that, as you had mentioned earlier in your opening, there's a lot of changes happening in the marketplace, especially given the loss of identifiers and the loss of cookies. And it's going to be that much harder, going to be very difficult for a lot of companies to actually collect data and create attribution models off of it, let alone multi-touch attribution modeling off of it. And so, again, encourage you to really participate in any organization to voice and provide use case studies, exactly how your organization is structured, the financial impact that this will have to your revenue, to your bottom line, the amount of investments that you'll need to actually accommodate all these changes. So we have, example is the Partnership for Responsible Addressable Media, which is a worldwide consortium of various different organizations, from marketers to tech to publishers, really getting together and really starting to document and outline what are the business use cases and what are those logistical and technical needs in order to enable us to do the work that we're thinking that we want to continue with, which includes remarketing, retargeting, lift measurement, A/B split testing, creative sequencing, audience segmentations, and things of that sort. We're going to be in quite a challenge in trying to figure out the difference between data coming from Safari versus coming from Chrome, and then everything else, right? So we have more walled gardens, have a lot of it different data points that are fragmented and inconsistent. A really good example is if you're a marketer and you have a video campaign, I'm sure you're running that video on your website, in your own social handle, as well as paid social, display media, video campaign, television, and so forth. And just trying to collect video data across all those platforms and align them and compare them to one another is quite difficult. I came from Morgan Stanley, where I was running analytics, and we had a very heavy, or they still do have a very heavy video campaign where they are developing lots of different videos for all across all different channels. And my job was to aggregate how many video plays, video completions, likes, shares, and so forth. And it was very, very challenging.
That would have prepared you well for agency world, having to do that again in a broader sense. Yeah, fantastic. Imran, Double Verify obviously have been working with, I guess, buy and sell side, looking at media quality and how that feeds into impact. How are you seeing all these changes feeding up into the measurement framework for marketers?
Well, so for DV, I think like we work directly with a lot of major global brands as well. And like, so our advice probably when we're speaking to big brands is there's probably two parts around research, which is like look for guidance from the bodies like the IAB. Obviously, you know, the IB have set out frameworks in Europe and in other regions as well. But that's like, as Angela said, it's the coming together of all of the partners that are within the IB. So you're looking at multiple different businesses within the industry, bringing together their expertise to help build that framework as a whole. I think a number of brands as well are working with their agencies, and those agencies themselves as well, you know, they've been spending years trying to understand how to develop a framework for their 100, 200 different brands to ensure there is a consistent consistency in measurement across their businesses as alone, right? So I think definitely working with the industry, with your agency partners, etc. But then that will putting that research in and will allow you then as a business to probably, I think, you know, create a common language or some sort of currency that you can define that is successful for your business, right? And then you can, once you can define that currency or that language that delivers some sort of an outcome for your business, that's how you then work with your partners to deliver that. And so you kind of get to the next phase, which is more about like how you align with your media with your brand and your sales objectives. And that kind of can kind of probably seem a little bit simple in terms of, well, we need to sell more product, we need to build our customer base, and we need growth. But it's not necessarily, it doesn't work like that when you go through the different stages. And you know, if you think about it from like when we're talking about media optimization, if we think that you know, an ad, for example, or something like that may be deemed non-brand safe, just as an example for their business, or not necessarily suitable. There probably are other indicators across that impression that can be measured now that are within your framework that can define that it's actually still going to drive value for your business and an outcome that you may require. For example, you know, it may sit on a cusp of what deems brand safe or not for your business. However, the viewability might be there, or it's definitely gone to a human. So when you take in different data inputs and you can assess them, once you've built out your framework, you can then decipher on actually that quality of that media and how that delivers performance. But ultimately, you need to build that framework out with your partners and define your own currency.
I'm going to come back to you on that because that's really interesting, and the devil's in the detail on how to do that with all those complicated details. So, but
I think it is actually a really interesting point, Gabe, that one thing that I worry about people going into these frameworks, and definitely some of the discussion that's happened now, is that we go too black and white. So, you know, like when viewability comes into it, or whether, you know, how long a video is being viewed for, all of these sorts of metrics. And I hear people kind of going, oh, it should be completed view, or it should be 100%. I think, you know, definitely, you know, a video that's been viewed right to the end is going to have more impact than one that's like not viewed or only for 3 seconds. But there's the danger in saying absolutely zero impact. I think, you know, it means that people are going to miss the opportunity to make sure that the frame that's sitting there on the screen before it's run is, you know, has your distinctive assets and is well curated, because that can work as a banner ad on its own. Less value, definitely, but how much less? Because you want to be buying your media by knowing how much more or less sales. There's not one thing that goes, yes, this gives you all the sales and this gives you none of the sales. It's understanding that variability, which is why I think it's always important to try and link all of those metrics back to a sales or a conversion or to something as your metric, so you can understand how much. Because I think, you know, sometimes we get too binary without realizing the value is actually in the gray.
And I think another thing to your point, though, is that we need to consider the creative element in this whole equation. And doesn't matter if you have you know, a really good engaging video if your branding isn't until the last frame, right? So if it's unclear on what your product or your services are until later in the video, or even just in a banner ad, you can't expect that your brand awareness or the brand impact is a lot higher than if it was something that was persistent throughout the ad.
Yeah, totally agree. We've been trying to get that message through for about 20 years now. So I think the skippable part of videos definitely brought that to light even more.
Well, even with the display banner, right? If you think about a skyscraper unit that is above the fold, if your logo and your call to action is below the fold, you're less likely to have a higher brand recall or even a higher click-through rate. So I've worked on the agency side for about 22 years, and the first thing we found was that animated GIFs were a lot more, had higher response rates because they were typically static, and the brand and the call to action was always prominent.
Paul, long-term brand effect. I know you guys have definitely, you know, you look at the short term, but you also feed in what's happening long term. With all the changes in market, and long term needs a pretty big look back window to work out what's gone on a year or two ago.
Yep.
Are we getting better, or are these changes an opportunity for us to get better at that sort of understanding the long-term brand effect in a quicker way, which I know sounds like an oxymoron, but
I think there's two really interesting dynamics at play here. One, I think that we're getting better at understanding what brand metrics would work. So I think that, you know, if you're looking at something that's mid-funnel and you're trying to move a mid-funnel brand metric, you know, ideally it's like, say, brand equity, but maybe it's consideration or something like that, then you're going to be driving a long-term ROI impact. I'm almost 90% sure on that now. Anything that's too close to funnel, you know, like I would recommend, I'm likely to buy, it's too correlated with the sale. It's not giving you that impact. Something that is at an awareness level, it's too high, the movements aren't meaningful. But that mid-funnel level, if you are tracking that as part of your activity and you see a movement in that, then you're definitely adding to long-term value, long-term ROI for that client. How much? You know, that's a question that you need modeling for, and you know, you need to kind of go back, but you will definitely be moving it in the right direction as you do that push. The other thing that's come up though, so, you know, like you've got that, not everybody has brand tracking, and some people, you know, they have brand tracking once every 6 months, or they have, you know, like just dips or anything like that. You know, controversial, but share a search. It's out there now. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at it as an input measure, but actually I think it's the output. It's the looking at it as a measure of saliency. So as your share of organic search relative to your category, and this is where the key is making sure that competitive set is defined correctly. It's the key to it. It is predicting longer term movements. So if you're moving that, you're also, I think, likely to be moving your long-term ROI. There's, you know, keys to it. As people start gaming it, it might fall down, but I think that's the fastest one, because as well, then you've got daily levels and you've got like a count that is going to be greater than any brand tracker. So I think they're the two opportunities to be able to get faster. But, you know, Share Search, an evolving thing, definitely moving those mid-funnel brand metrics, you know, hand on heart, you'll be, you know, if we then ran a model on it, we'd say, yep, you've increased long-term brand ROI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying the debate around share of search that's going on in market at the moment. The one thing I do like about it is it's accessible for a broader range of brands.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's quite exciting. Comparable metrics has been a term that's been floated around for a long time, and there's pros and cons for that. And I guess that goes hand in hand with transparency as well. Angelina, in terms of, I guess, the industry driving some sort of understanding of what people are looking at, whether that be data transparency, whether that be how different metrics compare. I know you're involved in a lot of projects with Tech Lab and the main part of the IAB. What's really moving the industry forward, or what are the opportunities there to really help marketers get that understanding of what the actual playing field is?
So right now in the US side, I have a working group that's really focused on what we'll call developing some datascapes and really helping to identify and map what types of data is available and desired out of different perspectives. So looking at it from a channel perspective as well as a device, and then figuring out how those different types of datascapes actually can interconnect or intersect with one another, and identify some of the gaps and challenges that we have. So even with let's just say a display campaign, your data would look very different between a desktop, a CTV, and or a gaming system versus a mobile device. So being able to understand especially from an attribution standpoint, what you can and can't report and ascertain from the system. So we're working really closely in trying to map out what does the data flow look like, what data is currently being collected, and how can we synergize some of the taxonomies and the nomenclature around these. You know, even I think a good example that I've seen is even within the Google advertising marketing platform between DV360, DCM, and double-click search. If you try to look at all the headers of each of the data dimensions, you kind of scratch your head and figure out like which ones actually align, because how do I actually then compare? So that I think that's an aspect where educating companies on what those are, and then having companies like platforms then decipher and say, okay, our metric or our reporting field for this equals this standard that is being developed or that has been established by any of the accreditation companies that we have.
I guess that's the trick, right? And Imran, you might have a point of view on this. So we're getting, I think the industry's finally heard the call for transparency and a better understanding of what's going on under the hood. But that's complicated, right? So we want greater transparency, empower advertisers to make informed decisions. But there's a lot of detail there. You've got marketers who are increasingly challenged for time, wanting to try new different formats and different platforms. How can marketers get that balance right? You work with a lot of direct clients. Are they investing the time and energy needed for that, or is it just sending them bonkers?
I think I think in a lot of the clients that we work directly with is because they've got a plan in place in terms of how they want to I suppose optimize the final point of that cycle, which is engagement with the consumer. So I think Angela, I think you mentioned earlier on around, creative is incredibly important. And Paul, if you think about the planning cycle, it's like customers and advertisers and agencies are trying to understand that consumer, their behaviors and what drives influence, and to build out those media strategies. Okay, how are we going to engage those consumers? What's the creative message going to be, et cetera, and what channels are we going to buy across? When we talk about kind of transparency in measurement of digital advertising, for me, I think that's like the very end point of optimization. So it's great knowing that what your demographic is. It's great spending millions of dollars on these wonderful creative assets. But when you get to the final point and you maybe are optimizing purely to a data signal that's telling you that impression is going to be viewable, that is that point where you win or you lose that potential transaction with the customer. And for us, the way we look at quality is I think, and the IAB will have it as well, is that there's kind of 4 pillars of quality that we can measure in the industry, and that's around fraudulent activity. It's measuring if a brand is in a safe environment based on the criteria and the segments that are in the market that are available. Is it viewable, which has actually been probably one of the major drivers for assumption of media quality for the last number of years. And then something that's actually can be discounted as geography, right? Unless you're doing hyper targeting in a city or something like that, you never really consider the geography. But actually, because of fraudulent activity and because of different things going on, sometimes an ad might not even appear in Australia, right? So the important thing for us is, I think for an industry, if you want to look at quality and you want to bring these 4 pillars together, is understanding the variance between them and the importance against each of those kind of key pillars. And for us as a business, when we work with our customers, what we launched in the market, 4 or 5 years ago, without trying to plug it too much, is the ability to deduplicate that impression, right? And it's an accredited currency or single currency where you can look at a single impression and see if it is fraud free, if it is viewable, or if it's brand safe in the right geography. That ultimately can define quality as a whole at that endpoint of when you're deciding to buy that impression or not. It might be the right publisher. It could be really high quality publisher. However, there could be brand safety issues or brand suitability challenges. For example, what we're seeing right now around COVID and news, right? It might be a viewable impression, but it might not be suitable for your brand right now. Or conversely, it may be positive news about COVID and potentially the economy, or cures, or community support, etc., that would be suitable for your brand and it's viewable, but you may put a blanket ban down across COVID news. So I think there's definitely nuances into how you define the quality of a specific impression. I think definitely being able to see or deduplicate that impression across the 4 pillars of quality that the industry has defined is important. But you know, there's assumptions and there's research to be done, but then there's also AI and technology that has to make those decisions for us in real time, because there's just so much data to be processing through a single impression, and the AI is allowing us to build those assumptions or laws of probability on if that is the right and the highest quality impression or inventory for you to purchase. So kind of that's how we kind of see it really.
And on the viewability angle, which you're right, like I don't think we talked about anything else 3 years ago, and it seems to be a little less. But one part of that, the time spent seems to be, you know, bubbling up in terms of importance through a whole lot of different research. Are you seeing that time part of the viewability rather than the percentage of pixels on screen becoming more of a factor?
Well, definitely in the CTV space.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think with the growth in CTV, you're now able to measure the quartile of an ad. So what sections of the ads actually played. And I suppose when you think about investment of advertising dollars, like the industry is not growing, right? Like total investment in the industry is growing in a very, very tiny fraction. But what we're seeing is shifts in investment from different channels, like so from TV or non-digital channels into digital. And the growth that we're seeing is very much since the COVID pandemic has been around social. And I think social consumer engagement with social is up something like 47%, and with CTV it's up 44% since COVID, right? So consumers are flocking to those 2 areas, and dollars are moving into those areas. So measurement's really important. One thing that an advertiser wants to be able to measure if they're going to start buying high premium CPMs and CTV is the fact, is it viewable? What parts of your video, your 30-second or your 15-second is viewable? So we're seeing in CTV definitely the measurement around specific quartiles of an ad. And that then, I think back to Angelina's point earlier on was, where is your key point in that ad? Is it up at the front? Are the first 5 seconds of that video content actually what needs to be said, as opposed to building that long story with the kicker at the end? And but that insight into how consumers are engaging with ads, be it on CTV, etc., being able to measure by quartile allows brands to then understand how to repurpose creative for the set channel.
I'd like to make,
isn't it? Because isn't it a problem if you go with just high quality? It depends what your objective is, right? So if you're trying to go for engagement, you're trying to launch something, obviously the viewability is really important because they need to go all the way through it. If all you're trying to do is nudge people and remind people, then you need less. I think that's kind of the danger, I think, with people going just quality. I mean, you know, if we were to turn this to TV, it'd be, I need all of my TV advertising in peak, you know, in prime time. Whereas the reality is we know you need some in prime time, but it's never going to be the highest ROI for you. It's never going to be the thing that does the most. So I think it's like, you know, having that one approach. I think you need the nuance depending upon what the objective is. Sure, if it's engagement, if it's a launch, 100%, but then understanding what's the trade-off from premium. Because generally when we're running these models, the most expensive thing is not the thing with the highest ROI.
Yeah, I was going to add, so in order to get these measurements, in order to understand this data, we need companies to push publishers, brands to push publishers to adopt new standards. And, you know, I don't have specifics, but a good majority of publishers still on VAST 2.0. And in order for us to get better measurement with Open Measurement SDK, with and so forth, providing transparency for both the publisher and for the buyer, we should be encouraging publishers to start shifting to VAST 3.0. and above. So I think it's important that that the entire community understands and educate themselves on what are the tech standards out there, so that we can then move towards a more holistic approach in terms of what we can and can't measure. I know that with companies like Double Verify, whenever, if you want to measure all the creative itself using the universal ad ID or understanding content classification and genre and all that stuff, you actually need that VAS 4.0 in order to pass through with that high resolution video asset.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We've got a very strong call to action in the market to upgrade standards at the moment. So I think all three of you, even though there's some disagreement there, are saying the same thing. We need to know what that quality looks like. Paul will then tell us if what the trade-offs and financially are going to make the thing, and Angelina definitely from those building blocks that we need to have in place to allow all this to happen. Before we wrap up, I'd love each of you to give a sentence or two, and Paul, I'm looking at you, and I'm meaning a sentence or two, on I guess the one change that's happening in the market at the moment that you see as the most positive impact, particularly as the market hopefully bounces back buoyantly in 2021. What are you, I guess, most excited about in terms of change? Angelina, let's start with you.
I'm actually hearing from both publisher and marketers, and even the intermediaries in between, really being conscious of consumer privacy. And there's a lot of conversation out there in the marketplace. And one of the interesting pointers from a particular brand that I overheard was, do we actually have too much data, too much content? Should we actually take a step back and figure out a framework in which we are more self-conscious about how we're using data and collecting it? So just because we have it doesn't mean we should use it.
You could also put creative in play there, that consumer experience piece as well as privacy. Yeah, cool. Imran.
Well, for 2021, it'd be amazing if we actually got a vaccine, which would be amazing. I think that would
okay, we'll order that. Yep.
That would just everything, right? I mean, like, it would kickstart the economy, it help the market, it bring consumer confidence up again. But really, I think for me, what I'm excited about and what we're excited about is when we see growth, consumer engagement in media and growing in certain areas of the business, and investment coming into these spaces like CTV and new social networks that are growing faster than was expected at the start of the year. I think it goes back to the original question at the very start, Gay, which was, how do we build a framework to allow brands to be confident and comfortable on how and where they invest? And that's around, as these social platforms that are growing because consumer engagement is there and because CTV is growing in all markets, how do we ensure that there is transparency into those growing media? Because I think over the years, we'll all have had that experience where areas such as, programmatic for 4 years was like growing, but then people were talking about it being a black box, but then there's independent measurement in those spaces, and you see the growth of that over time, but it had a stalling period because of that level of transparency. I think if we look at the areas that are growing over the next 6 months or have been growing, and we can offer that level of transparency at the start, it will create confidence in the marketplace, in advertisers, to continue to invest in those areas, because ultimately that's where consumers are going. And for me, that's what's really a positive. And the work that we're doing with the IAB globally and locally as well, to try and deploy on the SDK to build out the standards, and should allow advertisers to continue to invest in those growing areas.
Yeah, I'm excited to see, sort of as programmatic digital out of home and audio as well, we can get it better from the start. Yeah. Paul, what are you excited about?
The thing that I'm most excited about for the digital community is people starting to take it a little bit more seriously in terms of experimenting. So the wider marketing community are no longer saying, I can just put my TVC online, right? That's probably the number one thing. People experimenting with creative, experimenting with new techniques, realizing that you need a different brief to get a good 6-second and a long form than what you do from your TVC. Starting to really dig into it, because I think that means they'll start taking a look at the data signals that are there. They'll start taking a look at the measurement that they have. And I think it's that broader community that are going to help push a lot of this through. But I think, after a long time, we're finally getting people to realize, yeah, it is actually quite different. It's only taken, 20, 30 years, but it's exciting to see, I think, now.
We'll mix things up again next year. That's one thing you can be assured of. Thank you all for your time. Angelina, you can clock off and have a cocktail now and relax. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, all of you, welcome. No judging here.
Coffee at my place.
Thank you all for your time this morning.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Okay, cheers. Thanks.
See ya. All right, now we're going to have a fun interactive session with Ipsos. Brian, if you want to turn on your screen and sound, and I will bring up a shared screen. So welcome, Brian. Thank you so much for supporting the IAB.
Thank you, Guy. I assume you can hear me. Give me the thumbs up.
Yep, gotcha.
Very good. Fantastic.
That's fantastic. So do you want to intro what we're doing here and sort of hit the launch button for the poll?
Yeah, I will. And I might just take the opportunity to introduce Ipsos in very few words, because I want to assume that everybody at the conference knows who we are. We are a market research company. We're a global business, but with very strong local business in Australia and New Zealand. We work across a number of disciplines: government, corporate reputation, consumer behavior, innovation, customer experience, and so on. But we have a very big business in media and advertising measurement. And that really falls into two areas: audience and effectiveness. So this is what the conference is all about. In Australia, we're probably best known for being responsible for the development and launch of the Emma news media cross-platform currency, and in fact, which incorporates obviously the IAB digital audience currency. So that was quite an innovation. So we're also we've been appointed in the UK to be the agency responsible for digital audience currency in that market from January 2021. So what this survey that we're going to serve to you is all about is a little bit of a reflection on some of what Richard and Gay spoke about in terms of identifying the priorities going forward for digital measurements. Richard mentioned the North Star that they'd identified with the WFA. So this little survey lists some of those aspirational targets. The way it's designed is you choose one. So obviously with this sort of stuff, things aren't mutually exclusive. And no doubt, as Gay and Richard said, if you ask people what they want, they will say they want it all. So this is just a way of prioritizing some of the opportunities and issues going forward. So yeah, if you want to serve up the survey, Gay, we'll let people vote.
All right, there we go.
Just remember to scroll down. There are, in fact, two questions. One of them is on the future of measurement. The other one is a straightforward confidence test for next year. So we'll give you a minute to respond to those. And when Gay thinks we've had enough responses, we'll make some sort of comment on the results.
And are you going to sing and do some music in the meantime, Brian?
I'm going to put my microphone on mute. Yeah, it might be worth pointing out that this is an anonymous survey, so we won't know who voted on what. So if you think ad fraud is the most important thing, that's okay. We won't know it's you.
I've been told there's still responses coming in, so we'll just give it another 10 seconds or so. And then we'll all see the results. And then we go off and solve for that, Brian. Is that what happens?
And then we what?
That we go and build a solution to solve the most important problem.
Well, that would be the ideal. We've got to solve every problem.
All right. Tiff, if you want to bring up the results in the background here. Let's see where we landed.
Okay. So what have we got?
So Brian, you're going to act as analyst and tell us what the market thinks.
Yes, process the results. Okay, so the number one most important measurement challenge for the industry is industry standard cross-media campaign measurement, followed by capturing and measuring attention to advertising. That probably does not surprise me. I would say that reflects the general sentiment of the industry. And I think the interesting thing there, the one thing that would stand out for me is that measurement generally seems to follow two trains of thought. One is audience measurement, which is the sort of traditional business that companies like Ipsos or Nielsen or others deliver to media owners. In other words, they say, well, this is the number of people who viewed or read your or listened to your content. How often did they do it? But effectiveness on campaign measurement and advertising is often treated as a separate exercise. But of course, for advertisers who ultimately pay all our bills, they really want to know, did my campaign work? How did it work across media? And that is really the challenge, to incorporate a campaign and advertising dimension into audience measurement currency. So I think that probably reflects quite well some of the debate that's going on at the moment, and in particular some of the North Star priorities that the WFA have identified. And I think it's certainly doable. I mean, there's no, it's a matter of industries and media publishers working together to really standardize how things are measured. And I think there's obviously some very subtle differences between different media platforms. You know, news media delivers on trust, radio delivers on intimacy, TV delivers on group engagement or viewing as a group. So it's not an easy thing to do, to standardize, and no doubt there'll always be a need for individual currencies that take into account the very unique qualities of different media. But it's obviously the aspiration is to have something that standardizes campaign effectiveness across all media platforms and channels. I'm not sure I have too much else to say about that. Fraud is low because I don't think that's necessarily, it's a very important issue, but it's not at the core of how currencies are developed. I mean, it's something that's effectively dealt with. So let's look at the confidence for next year. So everybody, in terms of more than half, are saying ad investment will grow on 2020 levels. I guess that would be highly expected given such a shocking year we've had. Quite a lot of people thinking it'll stay the same. That's rather gloomy. Well, let's hope it all grows.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, Brian, won't it? Because yeah. I guess the first quarter was still, you know, we were very little impact. So overall for us, yeah, it'll be mixed.
I mean, I suppose the question is probably more, how does it compare to 2019? You'd certainly hope it's better than this year. And then will it be better than the year prior? So that's a positive signal. Ad investment will grow next year, 56%. So yeah, let's go with that. Let's go with the optimistic outlook.
And the 6% of the people who think it'll decline.
Oh dear, yes. Yeah, well, as
it's been a tough year. We've got, you know,
so much depends on how we recover and whether our markets open up to, I don't think anybody's expecting overseas travel to start, but, you know, locally, our businesses and our media sector is focused on the local market. So let's cross our fingers and hope that it works. Was there any other aspect of the first section you wanted me to look at, Gay, or is that summarize it pretty well?
I think that's fabulous, Brian. And I mean, from that second bit of the survey, we're definitely seeing the data that we're collecting each month. August and September have been great. and bookings out to December look pretty strong as advertisers need to sort of start moving products. So I think we'll have a good end to the year, and all work very hard to make sure next year flourishes. So thank you, Brian, and we'll see Ipsos back tomorrow for the next polls.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity.
Pleasure. All right. We've got another video to share with you now. So I'm just going to bring up my screen again. So we've got another interview from the UK with the commercial office of Nielsen Global Media. So our local Nielsen team report up into Matt, who looks after most of the markets, primarily outside of the US. So really understands, I guess, all the other markets and how they operate. We have been working with Nielsen from a currency point of view for many years. Even within sort of the last 10 years, we've had to rebuild products for changing consumption and changing technology a number of times, and we're undergoing one of the biggest rebuilds in the Nielsen currency, and I know Ipsos are doing similar things in the UK for the UCOM contract to make a currency not reliant on cookies. So the benefit, I guess, of having traditional media measurement is having strong panels in place, but we've also been lucky enough to have a hybrid model and feeding sort of digital and tag data in the mix to particularly help with that scale of understanding unduplicated reach and frequency. So there's a lot of work being done locally and globally to rebuild currency products. I'm going to hear from Matt on that, but you will hear from us and Nielsen locally in relation to new products and new data sets that'll be launched very early in 2021. So there'll be a lot of information in market, a lot of even though the philosophy will remain the same, some differences in data sets coming through. So always reach out to the IB if you've got any questions on what's coming through. And meanwhile, I will play the video, and let's hear from Matt. Morning, Matt.
Good morning, Gay.
Welcome
Greetings
to
from London.
Thank you for joining us for the Measure Up conference. We're hoping to have you in person, but next year, if not next year, the year after, we'll get you down.
Great.
We work very closely with Nielsen locally, the local team. I'd love to chat to you, I guess, about some of the global perspective that you're seeing, as well as some of the things that I know you're involved with the local team for measurement in our market. So let's start at that broader piece. And I guess the first question is almost going to be too big, but then we'll come back in. So as we know, everyone in this space, whether you're on buy, sell side, everyone in between, is looking at rebuilding, changing what signals they're using, browser check changing, privacy changes around the world. All of it's coming, which I try and think of as exciting opportunity to rebuild this industry. You're working for a huge global company. I know you're looking at different. You look after international, so you've got a whole lot of different markets. How are you trying to rebuild for such a wide? Morning, Matt. Sorry about that.
Good morning, Gay.
Welcome
Greetings
to the
from London.
I'm so sorry, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the products.
Well, let me assure you, the disruption you're seeing, you're not alone with. So if misery loves company, it is a global phenomenon right now. But a lot of this, I'd say the majority of this disruption is centered around protecting online privacy. And we're seeing it manifest in many different ways. But if I had one phrase, it's all about consumer privacy. And as you said, there's browser security changes, like we see with Firefox, and device manufacturers are putting more stringent security, to prohibit, device identification, the deprecation of third-party cookies, publishers implementing new business rules, restricting off-platform tracing, and what that centers on is everybody wants to respect and protect, the relationship they have with the consumer. So this is driven, I think, the majority about that, but it makes it more difficult for us to understand the audience, from frequency, duplication, and particularly across multiple platforms. And we're going to see more things like this ahead. So I don't see the concern about personally identifiable information ceasing. It is about consumer privacy, and we want to be supportive and be sensitive to protecting that privacy. It's always been a core part of the trust they have with a measurement company or any model. So when we look at our products, it's privacy by design. In fact, privacy is the design. So our priority is sort of threefold. Investing in creating methodologies that are independent of cookies, which you well know about. And creating proprietary approaches, for device identification, and decreasing our reliance on third-party demographics. We've got to hit all three of those in order to ensure we respect consumer privacy and that we're able to provide and maintain, consistent measurement.
So I'm not sure if I like to put myself in different people's shoes. So if I was Nielsen, or I guess a lot of the traditional research companies, I'd be happy and sad. I guess happy that I had old school panels, I guess. So, that I've got as a base some compliant, privacy compliant things, but I'm not sure when you're rebuilding different products, if that, if it's still as hard. So I guess what's the role that you see panels in terms of in measurement going forward? There's been a lot of talk about, the panel is back.
Right.
What do you see? I guess, do you see panels still playing a huge role, and can they really do the job that we need to in a fragmented market?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the fragmentation term, because fragmentation continues to challenge, how effective, panels are in providing some kind of stable read of an audience, on any given day. And, so we vacillate, and we obviously look at and straddle between opt-in panels and probabilistic panels, so you basically need both. But with opt-in panels alone, they can't really serve the market on their own because there's the risk about representation. So they're definitely not as useful as probabilistic panels, but regardless of the pros or cons of either of them, we believe they both remain, sort of at the core of our measurement strategy. And we're seeing that, everybody's thinking the role of these panels are going to change. And yes, they will change, but we still need to take advantage of what we consider to be the truth that we observe in the panels. And so there's sort of like old school modeling, things that we grew up with, like weighting and scaling and modeling off of one point in day or time, one day in time that you can, project forward, and that doesn't do enough to overcome fragmentation. So the good news is the advances in new school modeling, utilizing bigger data sets, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that's helping us to understand, the richness of longer term behavior in a panel, so that you can illuminate, a trend over time and not just observe, one particular signal. So rather than the panel observation being any given day, we can train our models, the probabilistic models, to use more observations over time. So the new models are observations over time and predicting on observations rather than one particular day or daily event.
Okay, so
we're not going to give up on weighting and scaling, but we can use the best of artificial intelligence, of modeling over time, and that's what our data science, that's why we have an army of data scientists to work on things like that.
And I guess, we've had different types of probabilistic modeling from, day dot in the industry, and I guess there's been two angles, I guess, in digital, well, with panels, you've had your weighting and old school modeling, but also in programmatic, there's a lot of lookalike modeling, and, so it's just a whole lot of different models, I guess, and it's making sure the base of that model is, really, really robust.
Yeah, and I think the early days of programmatic were, gee, this just looks like a direct response model. This looks like what I did with direct mail 20 years ago, but that true has evolved. So, the models can refine and learn from it, from whatever results they've had. Yeah. So, it's an evolution, not a revolution. You don't throw out what does work from prior experiences, but we do benefit from utilizing more trended data than just observing one point in time.
So talking about, I guess, the Australian market, and I guess this would be relevant for some of the other markets that you're working on at the moment. So we had much fanfare in our market probably 5 years ago with the launch of digital content ratings as our currency, going from monthly, a hybrid model that had panel and volumetric data coming from the publisher side, going to daily data, weekly data, very granular demographics on every site, app, platform, etc. I know our measurement council locally with all the publishers and a lot of agency representation are busy working with your local team and your global team to rebuild that, I guess, ahead of necessary changes, which is great, and looking to launch something new in February. Tell us a little bit, what are the main, as you see it, what are the main changes coming for our market, and hopefully it matches what we see locally.
Yeah, first of all, there was great fanfare when we launched DCR in Australia. And that strong Nielsen connection between Sydney and New York, and we're very proud of that connection and the services that we've launched there. So it was, and it still is, a great global example of how you can measure content. But as mentioned, earlier when we were just talking, the privacy and tech changes are driving us to obviously rebuild this and rebuild it quickly. The remainder of the year, we will be developing and testing and reviewing the first iterations of this methodology. And we are introducing those products first in Australia. So, for the ratings from the start of 2021, and most of this, but we'll be shifting to the new DCR, digital content rating methodology. We're highly engaged with your measurement council, to review and preview the data. And while the shift, we'll see some principal changes into the product coverage and its features. Because we are launching something totally new. We'll ensure that we're insulated from the impacts of privacy. We have to make sure that is a tenet of what we deliver. So our DCR delivery will be split in two parts. There will be the overnight volumetrics, now including, video content delivered every day, for all tag publishers in the market. And then there'll be monthly reach delivered each month to help layer on the competitive analysis of the audience size and profile. And this will cover, the entire market, irrespective of whether a publisher participates, in tagging. And ensure that we quantify the market level trends. So that's sort of a mouthful there. On the planning side, from mid-October, we're going to expand the release of the digital content planning. What I sort of refer to as the syndicated respondent level data solution to the whole market. And we've been previewing this data with the IAB Measurement Council as well. And we're almost ready to go live. So this will give, the enhanced digital planning data, that's more closely aligned to DCR, and will power, the media planning across both the buy and sell side.
All right. So we'll have the planning data, which will have with the respondent level data. So we'll be able to do duplication across properties, using it in other data sets like your CMV and locally with the Emma print product. So those more accurate audience numbers, which are
that's an important point about CMV as well, and that's sort of Australia's been a beachhead on that as well, about applying in so many markets. It's so funny, people end up sort of dismissing the importance of lifestyle data. or any other data sets. And I really have to hand it to Australia, because as you know, I see 50 different markets. They really understand the importance of marrying data sets like CMV with currency data sets to give a rich and robust, then you can create, your own targets that way, so then you're not necessarily beholden to somebody's definition of what it is.
We just need to eventually work out ways to get it into programmatic and all other areas. So we're all sort of looking at the same data to an extent.
That's a great next step. That's a great idea. So I'll
leave that with you. If you could solve for that, that'd be great.
You have my commitment. I'll help you with that, because I've seen so much stuff that shouldn't be traded programmatically on that we can help clean that up together. Yeah,
it's a good time for data transparency and accuracy. So we've talked a lot about, I guess, tag publishers. The market's talking endlessly, quite rightly, about first-party data. So a lot of large publishers have obviously got their own data sets, as do clients. If you were a smaller publisher who possibly didn't have, you've got a direct relationship with consumers because they come to your website, but you might not be collecting actual logged in data for everyone. How do we ensure that those smaller media owners still have accurate audience data and, I guess, can get on plans?
Right. This is a great question. And this is one that I sort of personally feel passionate about. Maybe because I'm always for the smaller player or the underdog. I'm never for the one that's definitely going to win. I'm always for the, I want an egalitarian and equal, opportunity for all. But, it's really sort of a simple answer. For a long time now, the best way for a publisher to prove or represent their audience in any currency measurement is to participate in tagging. So you have to tag. And fragmentation of content across all the screens and distribution options, all of that, tagging will help ensure that we can count appropriately, that we can light up the publisher's content. So whether it's text or video, regardless of the size, delivered on an owned platform or through an off-platform channel, tagging covers it. It may not be, the answer everybody's looking for, but it also helps because it doesn't necessarily have to be about audience size. We know that's not always, the winning story or the winning angle, particularly for the medium-sized publisher. The measurement, can be supported by metrics and demographics, to enable and help the niche publishers to pinpoint their best audience. Could be based on something like engagement, time spent on a property, or it could be the ability to just find, and as we were talking about earlier, target the difficult to reach audiences. So tagging.
Okay, clear message, that's good. And last one, and really easy one to solve, cross-media measurement, which we've only been talking about for a few decades. Right. There seems to, I don't know if I say this every year because, but there seems to be, again, I guess a more active conversation. A lot of the discussions over the last 10 years have been quite theoretical. And we seem to be, I guess, because we are rebuilding everything, whether it be identity solutions, currency solutions like yours. But we're seeing, I guess, moves by companies like the Trade Desk with universal IDs, LiveRamp with a lot of their audience sort of data, and the WFA, which is the advertiser-driven one, which we've heard about earlier this morning. What are you excited about and what worries you?
Yeah, this is you saved the best for last here, but look, what I'm excited about, the good news is that cross-media measurement is finally, I think, really receiving the recognition and the demand, from advertisers, buyers, and sellers. It's receiving the attention it deserves. And it's receiving, the measurement companies are certainly being asked, you have to solve it. And the advertisers are speaking up and demanding accountability, across all the platforms. And we've seen that very vocally in a lot of conferences just in the past month. So I think this is good news, that for everyone, the buyers, the sellers, and measurement providers, it's like the gig's up, we've got to solve it. And cross-media measurement is core, obviously, to our strategy, as it would be to any measurement provider. But that is our North Star, deduplicated reach. It's a very simple concept, but that's everybody's working for. And that's the most important thing we'll deliver to all the markets we operate. Now, obviously, the initiative that's garnered the most attention has been the WFA. But there are many other industry groups that sort of, jumped onto this or called attention to it. Like the ANA in the US is taking it very seriously. The joint industry, the broadcast JICs are taking it very seriously, and I hear from many lobbying groups representing all of them. So what's required? To do cross-media deduplicated measurement, it's really very simple. You need the cooperation from the platforms, the publishers, and the broadcasters. And 2 weeks ago in New York at the ANA conference, Mark Pritchard, the very visible CMO from P&G, stated that everybody has got to contribute their exposures, is basically what he was saying. He was asking for a level playing field and fairness for all. He called it out. Our CEO, David Kinney, spoke at the same conference and talked about how we are going to solve this as well. So I would not say, it's not fair at this stage to say it's solved. There were some headlines a couple weeks ago saying we solved it. We were just not there yet, And for one example, is, planning and currency, I don't think can be separated. The two functions have to work off the same data sets, so that you can understand what you planned for, did you receive it? What you paid for, did you receive it? Or is there some kind of, slippage? And also the other thing is, everybody wants, or big advertisers and multinational publishers want global standards. We'd all like it to be that easy, but you have to consider the local market factors. If you're doing business in a market and there are established currency rules or metrics, you can have cross-country and pan objectives, but you have to respect the local implementation, because currency varies country by country. So nobody's trying to rewrite 50 plus countries. It has to be decided locally. And not everybody participated in the WFA initiatives. The smaller publishers, I don't think, had much of a voice at the table. We need the broadcasters in that model. So the virtual ID model has to be adopted by it. Now, I've mentioned some shortcomings here, but it's a really good start. They're good principles. We like their North Star objectives, but nobody is saying that cross-media measurement is done.
Yeah. At least, it's the most engaged I've seen advertisers, and probably because they've got their own data sets as well that I've ever seen. So at least that energy's behind it rather than just, sell side, go and solve it. So it's nice to see a collaborative effort more, whether it's this initiative or many others.
From Nielsen, you're going to see our work on the identity space, as you had said, continued emphasis and use of panels, because the WFA clearly said that panels are needed to correct for the imbalances of other models or data sets. So panel quality is going to critically be important, and implementing machine learning, and everything that we know about it. We've already talked about the challenges rather. Observing consumers, what they do and what they surf and what they watch just through a panel, is not enough. There's walled gardens, there's, device erosion, there's, Apple, the new iOS platform, it's going to make it even harder. Yeah. But we're all going to need some kind of long-lasting, resilient form of an identifier, And then as an industry, we're also going to have to get comfortable with consumers who are going to want to opt out, So we want to build these relationships, but we have to respect their ability, to opt out. So we're going to remain open, and we're going to, play it out and stay as nimble as possible. But I don't think it's fair to say that anybody has all the answers right now. But I'm very encouraged, in all my time in measurement, I've never seen the industry, as you had said, this engaged. So that's a really good start. And I think the WFA has woken everybody up.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming with DCR and the new data and all your other products, and continuing to work with Nelson. Thank you for your time this morning, Matt.
Thank you, Gay. I'm sorry we couldn't do this in person, but I look forward to next year or the following year, and when we get back to a different cadence of life.
Fantastic. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So hopefully you guys got a little bit of insight on, I guess, global product changes for currency and some of the developments that will be going on in the Australian market. We do, as the IAB, take our role as helping to guide the digital currency from a content point of view incredibly seriously. I know it's very hard to keep many media owners happy, but we do try and create, I guess, a level playing field and some comparable data that advertisers and agencies can use for their planning. For our last session for the day, we've got a new piece of research that is going to be presented by Rowan Gifford from Google. Rowan's a long-term friend of the IAB, has been for his joy and sins part of the Measurement Council historically through Google and previous companies, so knows us well. As we talked about earlier, attention has been a hot topic in market over the last few years, and we're starting to see more and more experiments, models, reviews at what this means for marketers and how we can not only, I guess, from an environmental point of view, make sure that we're doing the right thing for consumers and brands, but also from a creative point of view, that we've got ways of really garnering attention. We heard in the session with Angelina and Paul and Imran the importance of creative and making sure that branding message is going quite, is up front and centre. So Google have done some work locally, I think, building off some of the work that they've done globally on video content and video ads. So without more ado, I'm going to hand over to Rowan and he's going to take you through this research. Please remember, pop Q&A in the box. I'll try and get to any that we haven't got to so far at the end of the session as well. But Rowan's open for questions. Over to you, Rowan.
Thanks very much, Gay. I will just start presenting and then kick off. Can you see my screen now okay?
Yep, all good.
Great, fantastic. So it was actually interesting when Matt was giving his introduction at the start of the day, he talked about some work he'd been doing in 2017 and 2018. And as Gay just mentioned, I've had some involvement with the IAB for a fair while. In fact, when I was preparing for the session today, I was thinking about the first involvement I ever did have with the IAB, which I believe was a Measurement Council meeting I attended in the middle of 2008, so more than 12 years ago. And one thing I remember from back then was the biggest issue we were dealing with at that time was if we were able to accurately measure internet activity on people's computers at work. So the idea of this deduplicated cross-screen measurement seemed like something a very long way off. And I'm pretty sure back then I'd never even heard of smart TVs, and I would expect many other people were in that boat. And we've heard a lot already about measurement today. When I got back to Australia at the end of last year, following about 6 years in the UK, I was really struck by the progress which the IAB and Nielsen had made, both in terms of what we can measure and also several dimensions of the granularity with which we can measure it. And we just heard Gay and Matt discussing that topic in the last session. But as necessary as these measures of reach and exposure are, and will always continue to be, one of the outcomes of the proliferation of platforms, devices, and environments on and in which we consume media is that I would argue these measures are no longer sufficient for either the planning or measurement of advertising campaigns if we want those campaigns to be as effective as possible. We need to complement our measurement of exposure with a better understanding of attention. Now, I suspect that's not new news to any of you. As Gay just mentioned, attention is a topic which is gaining increasing focus both here and in other countries. So we, as Google, want to contribute to the industry's understanding of attention, how it should be measured, why it varies and why it matters. In fact, our first piece of attention research in Australia dates back to 2015, but obviously we're not alone in this space. So lots of other publishers, agencies, and groups like the Attention Council are really active in the attention space. Now, unquestionably, attention is difficult to measure, and I think you could even argue that it's difficult to define. But what I have to share with you today is some really interesting, groundbreaking research that we undertook in Australia earlier this year, together with Kantar and iSquare, to uncover some new insights into both how and why audiences pay attention to some ads and not to others. But I'm also particularly happy that I'm doing this at MeasureUp, because the dual focus we have here over the next couple of days of marketing outcomes and the science of measurement means that, as well as sharing the outcomes of this research with you, I can do two other things. First, I can geek out a little bit about the methodology of our research, and certainly any of you who know me will know that that methodological geeking out is something I do tend to gravitate towards. But I'm also able to take some of the key things we observed in our research with Kantar and see if our database of the thousands and thousands of YouTube brand lift studies we've run over the last few years either show these insights holding at even greater scale or provide additional complementary learnings to what we learned in our research with Kantar. So to kick off with the methodology of our study with Kantar and iSquare, what did we do and why did we do it? Well, we recruited a group of Australian adults who agreed to let us observe their media consumption via eye tracking glasses. And you might be thinking, well, eye tracking research in itself isn't particularly groundbreaking, but what made this research different was the eye tracking glasses that we used. So these glasses are iSquare's latest and most innovative technology, and this is the first time that they've been used in Australia. And in fact, if you've been wondering what the significance of the picture on the left-hand side of the slide that I have up now is, it's actually someone wearing these eye tracking glasses. And you would be certainly excused for not having noticed that, just because of how much like normal glasses they look. No mess of cables connected to a laptop or TV, just an app on the phone. So these eye tracking glasses work like you would expect. This is just a short clip of some actual footage from the research. And if you can see the circle on the screen, that indicates where the respondents' eyes were focused. But it's really the unobtrusive design and usage of these glasses which is their greatest strength. So as well as our respondents using the glasses in their own home, like we saw here, they could also use them when they were out and about. And that's shown by this short clip, which actually has one of our respondents using glasses on the bus. Our respondents could consume or not consume whatever media they wanted. And so it's really these factors which combined to allow us to observe attention in the most natural way possible. And I really think is it's this fact, this naturalness and the minimisation of artificiality of both environment and also content, which are the most compelling aspects of this research. So in our field work, we were able to measure the attention paid to over 2,800 ads across YouTube, free-to-air and catch-up TV. And then all of our respondents completed a quantitative survey and a subset participated in a qualitative phase to allow us to dig deeper into some of the behaviours that we'd seen. But as I mentioned, what I also want to do today is lay these results next to the results we've seen from thousands of brand lift studies we've run globally over the last few years. And when I say brand lift in this context, what I'm referring to is the brand lift product, which is built into YouTube's ad serving infrastructure. Many of you may have some familiarity with the details of our brand lift offering, but just in case any of you don't, I think just a small final amount of methodological geeking out is warranted here. So when we're measuring the brand lift of an ad which is participating in the auction on YouTube, we randomly hold back a sample of people, but they only go into our control group at the point in time when the ad under measurement wins the auction for their ad impression. The advertiser obviously doesn't pay for this impression because it's not actually shown. But what we do have now is a very robustly selected control group, which differs only from our exposed arm because they didn't see the ad. And so then between a few hours and a few days following either exposure or being held back, we survey people when they're back on YouTube, which means we've then run a really properly randomly controlled trial and can draw causal conclusions about advertising effectiveness. Now, this measurement also benefits tremendously from YouTube scale. We collect thousands of responses for each survey and run thousands of these surveys every year. So we do have a very rich data source of brand lift for further analysis. And so with that, with this combination of the cutting edge research we ran here in Australia with Kantar and iSquare and our database of brand lift results, there are 4 key learnings that I want to share with you today. I'll look at the actual measurement of attention in our study, what it was and how it varied, and then 3 of the drivers of attention we've uncovered in terms of choice, creative, and context. So look, I realise that at this point I've talked about attention and I've talked about eye tracking, but I haven't linked the two, so I will do that now. In this project with Kantar and iSquare, our primary outcome metric, or our measure of attention, was the percentage of ad duration with eyes on screen. And this is a metric that's been supported by other work that we've done internationally with Media Sciences and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which showed that viewed time was by far the most important attention variable for predicting ad impact. And I do expect that when we hear from Playground XYZ tomorrow about their research, that they would agree with this point. And it's also certainly supported by our brand lift data. And so here is the first time where I'll introduce some of those results. So this slide shows the outcome of some analysis we did, where we took the results of about 1,000 brand lift studies and separated out the individual responses for those studies and looked to see if the ad shown for those responses was audible and or viewable. And so this is what we found. Across ad recall, brand awareness and consideration, we see significantly stronger brand response when people are exposed to ads that are audible and viewable compared to when this isn't the case. So just to explain what these numbers mean, in the case of ad recall, the difference between our exposed and our control group was 2.7 times higher for people exposed to ads that were audible and viewable compared to people exposed to ads that were audible only. Now, obviously, an ad being viewable does not guarantee that it will be viewed, as I will go on to show you very shortly. But this strong relationship between viewability and effectiveness does clearly support the use of eyes on screen as our attention message in this research. And so look back to the research here in Australia. Across the 2,800 odd ads that we measured on YouTube, free-to-air and catch-up TV, we saw that 51% of viewable ad minutes had eyes on screen. And this is a very similar figure to some recent walk research, which also had a figure in the low 50s. But this is the point where if I was presenting in a live forum, I think I'd probably ask for some audience interaction to see if folks actually expected this number would have been higher or would have been lower. And if I had been able to do that, I expect most of you would probably have expected a lower number, as my scrolling ahead a bit too quickly before just revealed that this 51% was actually 2 times higher than what the people in our respondents, the amount of attention that they thought they had paid to ads. Now, one important dimension where we did see variation in this key metric was by platform. So across the ads that we measured, YouTube had eyes on screen for 64% of ad minutes, which made it the platform with the highest percentage of eyes on screen, followed by catch-up TV on 54% and free-to-air TV on 49%. And so the obvious next question is, why did we see these results? What was the difference in the experience that our respondents had on the platforms that led to this difference in behaviour? And that's what the bulk of the rest of my presentation is about, because obviously there are a number of reasons that people will pay attention to some ads and not to others. Now, some of the reasons I'll go in to talk about are platform agnostic. A bad ad can be a bad ad, whether it's shown on YouTube or TV. But our research did suggest some reasons which may be more fundamental to the platform. So firstly, from the eye tracking in our research, we saw that eyes on screen dropped by 13% from the first ad to the second ad in multi-ad breaks on TV. And in both the quantitative and qualitative phase of the research, people told us they roughly know when and how long ad breaks will be on free-to-air TV and may actually plan for other activities during this time. So in some sense, we may have trained people how to not pay attention to some ads because of their predictability. But one particularly interesting thing we were able to do in our research was observe people taking mobile devices with them as they moved around. So one of the advantages of the eye tracking technology again. And obviously that ability to pick up a device and take it with you makes it easier to maintain eyes on screen for either YouTube or catch-up TV. And so this could be another factor contributing to the results that we saw at the platform level. Now, as I've said, I'll dig into a range of the other reasons people pay attention to some ads and not others. But before we leave the measurement space, there are just a few more insights to share about the relationship between eyes on screen and effectiveness that I think it is important for us to talk about. So firstly, in our research here in Australia, there was a significant correlation between the share of attention paid, or eyes on screen, and unaided ad recall. And again, we also saw that in the media sciences and Ehrenberg-Bass research that I mentioned previously. And interestingly, in that research, we did see examples of unfamiliar brands needing 10 times as much viewed time as familiar brands to have the same ad recall impact, which I think is very interesting and also worth bearing in mind, both when we're planning campaigns, but also when interpreting the results of any research on specific ads, if they can be quite sensitive to this brand familiarity. Now, obviously, one of the ways that view time or attention in our research can be increased is by people watching more of a single ad. And another way for that to happen is for people to watch multiple ads in a campaign. So to complement this view time correlation from our eye tracking research, I wanted to show you these results from our brand lift analysis, which are the relationship between frequency and ad effectiveness. So this chart shows shows brand lift for different metrics at different frequency levels, and for each of these metrics, the lift is indexed to the lift at frequency 1 for that metric. But there are three things that I find particularly interesting about this chart that I'd like you to take away. So the first of which is right across the funnel from ad recall through to purchase intent, we have significant lift amongst people exposed just the once. So here we have absolute proof that advertising, and YouTube advertising in particular here, drives lift in brand metrics from the first impression. Second, and again for all metrics, we have higher lift amongst people exposed twice than people exposed once, and higher again amongst people exposed 3 to 5 times. And in fact, for all of our metrics, except for favourability, which perhaps somewhat ironically is the least popular brand lift question to ask, and so the metric that we actually have the least data for, we have evidence of significantly higher lift again amongst people exposed 6 or more times. And so then the third and final thing to take away from this analysis is that in general, though, we do get the highest lift per impression amongst people exposed just the once. So that would imply this is the area where you are getting the biggest bang for your buck. So hopefully now we're all comfortable that eyes on screen are important, and I will move on to talk about 3 of the primary drivers of attention we've seen, which are choice, creative, and context, starting firstly with choice. So look, I think at a general level, I don't think anyone would disagree that people will pay more attention to content that they've chosen. And one quantification of that result is from some research that we did in the UK, where viewers told us that they're 40% more likely to mostly or entirely pay attention to a video that they've actively selected versus one that they're passively consuming. And this finding certainly extends to advertising as well. There are different extents to which it's possible to choose to watch or not watch ads on different platforms. The skip button on YouTube ads is perhaps the most straightforward way to exercise this choice. And we certainly believe this choice is good for advertisers because they don't pay for impressions which are skipped, but it's also good for viewers. And I think that was supported by our research here in Australia, where we actually saw it was the ads which a user could have skipped but didn't that had the highest attention. The next driver of attention to talk about is creative. And look, it's certainly an important one, but it is a driver that I need to be very careful about because I am definitely a numbers guy and not a creative guy. But luckily, all is not lost, because we do still have some quite interesting numbers about creative. So we've already heard from Paul on the discussion panel earlier today, and some of the analysis that he and the folks at Analytic Partners did showed that copy, quality or creative were responsible for a majority of an ad's ROI on both TV and online. And some other work that Analytic Partners did has also seen a 48% improvement in sales from digital video when people were making bespoke creative for that platform. Some of the other interesting results about creative come from the folks at Google who are much more creative than me. And they've done a lot of work to analyse advertising performance and see if they can find correlations between creative elements of ads and the advertising performance. Now, there's obviously no recipe for a perfect creative or any way to guarantee the success of a particular creative, but we have found that there are creative elements that are correlated with advertising success. And two of the ideas that come out of that work are either to go short or get chosen. And so for the latter of these in particular, we did see that our ads in our research here in Australia, which had the highest percentage of eyes on screen, employed creative elements that are consistent with our global learnings. So for example, one of the things that we've found can be more successful in a world of choice, so even if viewers don't have a skip button for every ad, they do have alternative ways to choose to not watch an ad, picking up another device or talking to a pet or something like that. But we have found that in these conditions, an ad that grabs and holds attention with a story arc like the one on the right of this slide can be more successful than the more traditional story arc on the left. And in the panel discussion earlier, I noticed Angelina made a great point about the placement of branding within an ad and its relationship to advertising effectiveness, which is certainly something that we've seen from our internal analysis as well. But I do think that even that, probably that sort of treatment of creative is about as much as it's sort of wise for me to talk about. So I might go back to spreadsheets and numbers now and get back to the drivers of attention, and the third of these, which is context. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say here that I've left the best of the drivers to last, but I might argue that I've left the most interesting simply because of how many dimensions context can have and some of the things that we have seen in this area. So as I said, context can mean a lot of things. It could be the time of day or the day of week people are exposed to an ad. It could be if they're watching an ad alone or with other people, or it could be where they are. And this was one of the really fascinating things we saw in our eye tracking research here in Australia. So I mentioned before that the design and the use of I-Squares glasses meant we could measure attention both in and out of the home. And some of our respondents actually wore the glasses on their commutes to work. This is back in the day when people used to commute to work. And we saw some of that in the short video that I showed earlier. And so in that, when people were sharing their experiences with us and they were out of home, we did see some examples of people consuming media when they were walking along the street. It's a behaviour that I'm certainly guilty of. It's not necessarily one that I would condone, but that's not a particularly stable environment. However, we did see people in what we would call stable out-of-home settings, like sitting on a bus. And in these stable out-of-home settings, we saw that ads could achieve the same level of eyes on screen as they did in in-home environments. Now, that may or may not be expected, but when you think about it, these settings typically include headphones to reduce or even remove all other distractions. And so these stable, typically smartphone out-of-home experiences are another example of one of the key things we observed in our research, which is that screen size is not one of the major drivers of attention. So another very important aspect of context for advertising is the content next to which the advertising is delivered. Or in other words, do car ads do better when they're shown before car content? And these results from our global brand lift analysis show that they do. So on this chart, the dark blue bars are the brand lift from ads which were shown before contextually matched content. And the light blue bars are the brand lift from ads that were shown before content that was not contextually matched. And as well as car ads, which are the first example on the left of this slide, We have a number of other examples of contextually matched ads outperforming non-contextually matched ads. So then the next dimension of context I want to consider is personal value. So how much do I care about, or how engaged am I in the content I'm consuming when I'm shown an ad around that content? A data point from some research that we did in the UK here shows that this is the case with people exhibiting 4 times as many engagement and investment signals when they were watching content that had high personal value to them. And here these engagement and investment signals were things like changing the volume, pausing, rewinding, changing your phone from portrait to landscape, these kind of things. But this is another result that we certainly have seen in our brand lift data. So to look at this concept on YouTube, we've used the concept of a channel's preference score. And just to briefly explain what that is, many of you may be aware of YouTube Select, which is inventory that runs before some of the most popular and engaging channels on YouTube. And we identify that content by giving every channel a preference score based on a whole range of signals like watch time, repeat viewership, and then social interactions, likes and shares, and so on. And what we did here was take the results from about 5,000 brand lift studies, and we broke them down by the preference score of the video following the ad being measured. So not the preference score of the ad, but the preference score of the video people were watching after the ad. And this chart shows the results for ad recall. So we have preference score on the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis is ad recall lift. And we see here that the higher the preference score, the higher the brand lift. Or in other words, what we found is that ads work better when they're shown before more popular and engaging content. I've only shown the results for ad recall here, but we did certainly find this result consistent for other metrics and across various countries and devices also. And so then the final of my dimensions of context, which I wanted to look at, is not related to ad effectiveness in the context of the content in which it's served, but the context of the audience to whom it's served. And so is it served to people who are in market for the product which is being advertised, or have at least displayed an interest in that product? So to investigate this point, what we really wanted to be able to do was isolate the impact of targeting on advertising effectiveness, and so control for other things, other confounding factors like creative that I've already talked about. So what we did here is found examples where the same ad had been served in 2 different circumstances. Once, just using intent signals on YouTube, and then secondly, just using demographic signals. And so when we compared the performance under these situations, this is what we found. So ads served with intent signals only had a consideration lift 30% higher and purchase intent lift 40% higher than when the same ads were served using demographic signals alone. And so, look, leaving on that point, that does sort of wrap up the sort of the content that I had to share with you today. I mean, I certainly hope from the last sort of 25 minutes or so, you would agree with me that I think this was a pretty fascinating piece of research that we did here in Australia, and where we were able to use eyes on screen to measure attention using this really innovative technology from iSquare and partnering together with Kantar. And in that, we could then observe some of the key drivers of attention that we saw in the way that our respondents behaved around choice, around creative, and around context. And that a lot of those have been supported by learnings from either other research that we've done internationally or our internal brand lift studies. Now, obviously, the focus of what I've been talking about so far today has been advertising. We are very interested, though, also in the attention that people pay to content more generally. And that will be the next phase of this particular piece of research. But if you would like to learn anything more about the stuff I've been discussing today, I think probably a really great place to start is at this link, g.co/YouTube Unboxed Connect. And yeah, so obviously do, or let me know if you have any additional questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rowan. That was amazing. I almost wanted to ask questions every slide, but I knew I wouldn't be allowed. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but first there's a question from the audience, and it's around, I guess, around frequency. And you showed some of the change in metrics going to sort of 6+.
Mhm.
There's always that talk of diminishing returns after a certain amount. Do we know that sweet spot yet?
So I don't know that from YouTube data, and one of the main reasons for that is because one of the things that advertisers can and very often do on YouTube is actually frequency cap. So people will set frequency caps at a weekly, monthly, campaign level, and it does mean that once we go past the frequency levels that I showed on the slide of 6+ and so on, the data does actually get, despite our millions of brand lift responses, the data does get quite sparse. And so I'm certainly not going to come out here and say that there is a significant positive relationship beyond that point, but I, in my analysis, haven't been able to identify where diminishing returns kick in. Now, obviously, we'd expect where they do to also vary at different points in the funnel. I mean, I think if I keep showing someone an ad, I don't think they're less likely to remember it, but I can probably piss someone off and actually lower consideration or favourability at various points. Look, I think it's a fair question and one I'd love to be able to answer, but not one I've been able to using the data that we have.
It's also a tricky one, though. I guess creative's getting a little bit more varied, pulling together from different platforms and different outlets, understanding that frequency across all channels.
That's a very good point. And I mean, and it is also worth pointing out that in general, when I do that sort of analysis using our brand lift data, I'm doing that at the campaign level, which can certainly include campaigns with a wide range of creative. So that isn't necessarily someone seeing the same ad twice. It could be people seeing 2 different ads in the same campaign. Sorry.
One question I had for you, and you'll probably think it's an odd one, but we've been doing a lot of work with our audio group, and I know YouTube's looking a lot at sort of audio ads, and you had the impact of audio alone, video alone, and then combined. Do you think, and this is for your next research piece, I think, if people are expecting it to be an audio ad, that differs? So if they're in an environment where, they're listening to music, is that impact different than if they're just listening into a video piece while they're doing something else?
So yeah, look, I mean, okay, so firstly, I absolutely don't know the answer to that, but it is a fascinating question, but it's almost asking about people's expectations of the creative in some sense. Like, do I expect this creative to have something that moves, or do I expect it to just have sound?
It's almost like expecting the subtitles now, if you're particularly in a social channel.
I mean, that's pretty fascinating. I mean, I think that feels like a question that just feels like a question that is so ripe for some good experiments. I mean, one of the other things that we do, and I didn't talk about it in any detail today, but we do have some really nice ability to run experiments within YouTube campaigns as well, where we can very, very neatly just like get segments of cookies and make sure there's no contamination, some of these sorts of things. And so, look, I think, like that, as you said, a great idea for some future research,
right.
but I don't know the answer to now.
I'll leave that with you. Thank you for that. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions coming out. So everyone who's on the call, we will share the video of this next week. So you can share with your friends and family. And thank you so much for joining us, Rowan. And thank you for geeking out. That's exactly what we want.
So, always love geeking out, guys.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye now.
All right. So that's our last segment for today. So we've been doing our weekly webinars fairly smoothly now. I think we're up to 29. So this is definitely stretching me and the team to do three days of 2.5 hours. But hopefully you enjoyed the content. I know there are a couple of little hiccups with the videos, but hopefully everything else was useful, and we will share the information. This is the lineup for tomorrow. So we get into some quite, I guess, detailed information on data. Particularly, so the opening sort of main session will be with Facebook and Woolies, looking at that retail side of things, which 2020 has been definitely a year for retail and e-commerce development. So this one is looking at omni-channel, so we'll be looking at both at e-commerce but also in-store behaviour. Following on from some of Rowan's research there, with Jess Miles from IAS, looking at context and the importance of those environmental factors. And I thought Rowan's slide of that, I guess that match, that audience match was really important there. And then we're going to have a quite detailed, wonderful panel session, which I'm really looking forward to, which JJ Jonas Yanamaji from the IAB will be leading a conversation with local and global thinkers about first-party data and really sort of how to get started and how to move forward, both from a technical and a privacy point of view, and making sure that also fits from a client point of view of actually working out what's working, what you need to do. And to one of Paul's earlier points in the panel early on, making sure that you're still looking outside of your current clients to a broader group, and making sure you're still onboarding new clients. So great lineup for tomorrow, and we will have the first winner of the Measure Up Awards. So we'll be hearing from Playground XYZ tomorrow as well, and looking at their attention research. So those of you who have tuned in today and tomorrow, you can compare the attention research across the different players by the end of the area. Tomorrow you get a break from me and the wonderful Natalie Stanbury, who's our research director, who has actually done most of the curating for this whole event and pulled it all together in a wonderful way, will be your guide for the day. So please make sure you chat, encourage, get involved in the conversations, and we will open up with a couple of different polls from Ipsos. So again, if you want to understand what your peers are thinking, tune in for that one and have a vote. So thank you everyone who joined for the day. I think there were some really important points on collaboration as always. One thing that I'm really pleased as the Measure Up years go on is the lack of separation of issues that are for the buy side and sell side. So when we were first curating Measure Up 4 years ago, there were very clear sessions that felt relevant for publishers and ones that felt relevant for advertisers. With the growth of e-commerce, first-party data, cross-media measurement, those issues are coming together. And, you know, dare I say, I won't say we're all in this together, will I? Anyway, you get where I'm going. It's really nice to see, I guess, those conversations making sense for all parts of the market. So hopefully you can join us again tomorrow. Please send through questions, comments, feedback. We're here for you. There are a lot of resources on the AAB website, a couple of papers that were put out recently, particularly on these topics. So Beyond the Cookie, a paper looking at the future of marketing measurement post-cookie. So really looking at those attribution models, a lot of the stuff we were talking about on the panel with Angelina, Paul and Imran, planning for the future, as well as a really fantastic data handbook, which if you read that tonight, you'll be all ready for tomorrow's session. So thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.